Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. As your host, Nick Giordano, I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure that you're following and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends, because I have a great guest coming on, President of the Convention of States, Mark Meckler, joining me once again, and he always provides fascinating insights. Everyone needs to check out conventionofstates.com. Mark, pleasure having you on. How are you today?
It's always great to be with you.
Well, I'm glad you could join me. You're an outspoken critic of the big government apparatus that we've been witnessing over the last few decades. And you said something recently that I completely agree with. You talk about how public trust is dead within government, that public trust no longer exists. Can you explain to the audience how we got to this point?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously this goes all the way back to the beginning of the country, but over the course of our republic, first of all, we've removed representatives from being actual representatives. The districts have grown so huge, 750,000 to 1 million. You can't possibly expect to have a relationship with or even know your representative. And so I think that's part of the detachment. And then the federal government has taken more and more power from the states. And as they've done this, power has moved further and further away from the average person. So they feel like they have no effect, and they feel like that their average representative doesn't care about them, which I actually think is generally speaking true. And so what's happened is, because we feel so detached from our government, we're frustrated. That's one layer of detachment. I think the second, Nick, which I've seen over my course of life in politics, which is about 15 years, is every time there's a big corruption scandal, and we've seen plenty of them, and they're not just limited to Democrat administrations, almost nothing happens to the people who are at the center of these scandals. I mean, I can go all the way back to my time suing the IRS on behalf of all the Tea Party groups. Nothing happened to Lois Lerner. And she was the center of that controversy. Obviously a wrongdoer. She wanted to a full retirement with a government pension. We see the same for guys like Clapper and Comey. And so every time there's a scandal, you think, okay, well, this is how we're going to clean it up and restore trust. And then nothing happens. I think the latest happened yesterday, literally, with the idea that there's no Epstein files, really. There's nothing to speak of. You know, I can't say whether that's true or not. I have a measure of trust for Dan Bongino and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, but man, they've sure set this up in a way that causes a lack of government trust. So I think every bit of lack of trust in government has been earned by our government over the centuries.
I completely agree. And I was skeptical of AG Pam Bondi when it was first announced that she would be the nominee. Now, I think that she's got to go. She came out when she first came into office, said that there's all this documents and binders full of Epstein files. Now we get, well, there's nothing really there. There's no there. And if there's no there, just release all the information. Put out every single document. I understand you can't put out videos, obviously, if minors and sexual acts or anything, but put out all the documents. But you're right. We haven't seen any accountability within this system. And then they wonder why people say there's a deep state. I mean, you had a CIA director, John Brennan, spying on sitting members of the Senate Intelligence Committee in 2014, and nothing happened to him. The whole Russiagate collusion, the scandal, nothing happens. It seems time and time again, there's no accountability in the system. And that's not the way the Republic is supposed to be designed. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, this will sound extreme, and I'm saying a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but in the time of the framers and the founders of this country, tarring and feathering was still actually a thing. And I think that public officials had an appropriate respect for the people that they represented. That respect born not just of they could throw me out of office, because they didn't care that much about that, but of genuine fear. Like, honor was a real thing back then. You could be called out for being dishonest. You could be entered into a duel essentially against your will if you impugned somebody else's honor. So the idea of a society based around honor is actually the root of a society based on the rule of law. if you don't have any honor, and I would argue in the public sphere, there's very little honor these days. If you don't have any honor, then you don't care if people find out you do bad things. Then you're willing to openly lie. You're willing to openly steal. And I think that's a fundamental problem. It's a moral problem that underlies the actual real world practical application of that moral problem.
Agreed. And you always bring up the idea of statesmen. That when we look at our founding fathers, we see ordinary men that go to a convention and they become statesmen. They become extraordinary men because they understand the complexities of human beings and governing, and they understand that, there's only one way for government to go forward, and it's constant growth. And so you have to keep that in check. Why have the politicians become so detached from the people besides the idea of accountability? Like, let's just look at the big, beautiful bill. There are elements that I support within the big, beautiful bill, but constantly we hear Republicans preaching about fiscal responsibility. And they always say, well, we're going to tackle it in the next bill. And they never do. Why is that such a problem?
Well, I think this is a structural problem more than a personnel problem. A lot of people want to impugn, for example, John Thune, the Senate leader, or Mike Johnson, who's a supporter of COS. They want to impugn him as the House of Representatives.
I think Mike Johnson's one of the most underrated speakers in the history of the United States.
Well, I think just getting that bill through, first of all, is absolutely miraculous with such a small minority. I also think he is certainly in my lifetime the most conservative guy to hold the gavel, genuinely all the way down to his core. But so if you look at this, we have these tiny minorities, and it's very difficult for people to get anything done. So I think there's two sides to that bill. One, a lot of garbage in it that I hate. Two, I would say it's the best we could do under the circumstances. And so what happens is you have a guy like Mike Johnson, and he has to cater to all wings of the party. He only has a couple of votes that he could spare to lose. I think the total number is actually 4 votes. It's one of the tightest minorities or majorities in the history of Congress. And so that involves massive amounts of compromise. There's pork that gets thrown in. There's special favors for different senators or congressmen. And we get something that really frustrates us. But the reality is with such a narrow majority, it's hard to get anything other than that done.
Well, and our founding fathers did warn about the factions, the Federalist 10 with James Madison. He warned about the dangers of it. But the two-party system, there's a lot of built-in factions. It's not like every Republican agrees with each other or every Democrat agrees with each other. These parties are both big tent parties. And I want to talk to you more about that when we get back from this quick break. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Are you ready to move easily and independently without pain and stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Well, discover Native Path Collagen, made with only type 1 and 3 collagen fibers. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut. They provide maximum benefits. And Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, it's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety. Completely flavorless, Native Path Collagen can be added to anything: coffee, smoothies, oatmeal, you name it. It doesn't clump, it absorbs fast thanks to its peptide formula. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a brand you could trust. They offer an 800 number for any questions you may have, and then you'll speak to a real person who's there to help. Visit getnativepath.com/PAS and start your transformation today. That's getnativepath.com/PAS. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. I'm with Mark Meckler, president of Convention of States. Everyone needs to check out conventionofstates.com. So, Mark, before the break, we were talking about political parties, and we see that it's very difficult to navigate. And our founding fathers made the system, when it comes to legislation, an extremely complex process because they didn't want to see a Congress just jam through bill after bill after bill. They know that that would render the Constitution useless within a few years. But now we have an interesting dynamic because we have Elon Musk coming out talking about potentially starting a third party. Now, normally people won't take third parties all that seriously, but when it comes to Elon Musk, he's certainly someone that has the money, the power, and the influence to make an impact. What do you think, and what are your thoughts on Elon Musk putting this out there? Do you think it represents a threat to the Republican Party? Do you think it's a third party that could actually become viable, or do you think it's more talk than anything else?
I think it represents a threat to the party, not in that it's going to overtake the party, but it might take away just enough to give Democrats a majority in Congress. And so we have to be very cautious about that kind of effort. Many years ago, Nick, I jumped in and studied third party efforts really deeply, trying to figure out what's wrong with our country and could a third party solve it. What I realized is pre 1900s, there were no primaries in the United States of America. The parties were essentially unregulated social clubs, and they would put up a slate of candidates. In fact, this is where we get red and blue. You might vote for the red, you might vote for the blue. And the idea was you didn't even know who any of those candidates were. In the early 1900s, primaries started happening first in Wisconsin, and they spread all over the country. That let anybody run for office. You didn't have to run yourself through the party apparatus. You don't have to know anybody. So it sort of seemed like a good idea, the good democratizer at the time. As with all things, because of human nature, as the parties grew more powerful and they started to see these challenges of primaries, they decided to make their jobs easier because they were the incumbents, and they locked in election laws that make it very difficult for third parties to operate, to qualify for the ballot, to figure out how they're going to get funded. All this stuff is very difficult for third parties. And so I understand Musk's frustration. I share that. I don't think this is practical in the scheme of things. Now, to be fair, Musk has done a lot of things no human beings have ever done before. So maybe he'll pull it off. I'm skeptical, and I think it's the wrong direction. My opinion, genuinely, not just out of self-interest, is if he wants to do something disruptive, if he wants to limit the federal government, he should support Convention of States, calling a Convention of the States, because that's how we get the structural reforms that he's looking for, not out of Congress.
Well, I was just actually, that was going to be a lead into the next question. So you already predicted where I was going with this. I mean, you look at someone like Elon Musk with his money and the influence he could have. And the two things that he is really talking about is fiscal responsibility and term limits on Congress, limiting, elected officials' time in office. So this aligns well with the Convention of States. Do you think as far as obviously he'd be better served helping the Convention of States, has there been any type of formal outreach by you to try and get him on board? Or is he even aware of the Article 5 Convention of States process?
Yeah, I do know he's absolutely aware. Efforts have been made, and there's been a little bit of communication back and forth. The biggest thing is if your listeners, your viewers actually tweet about it, actually contact him on X, direct message him, and anything where he's complaining about the federal government, if they at COS Project so that we see it, if they hashtag COS Project to Elon, all that stuff's really helpful. That's what he's paying attention to. He pays attention to the zeitgeist on X, and that's how he's going to decide whether or not to be involved. But he's absolutely aware of it. There are accounts, Nick, that he follows closely, like Data Republican. She's now become a big COS supporter, and she posts on X about it fairly regularly. So there are a few people like that. Insurrection Barbie is another big account, conservative account. She posts about it. Musk follows her. And so that's kind of how you get to Elon Musk, is you build a zeitgeist around an issue.
And wouldn't that be much more impactful than a third party that essentially splits votes between Republicans and the America Party, or whatever he's going to call it, and basically hands the Democrats victories that are undeserving, but more importantly, that are actually dangerous when we look at the Democrat agenda in today's day and age?
I agree with you, and I'm worried about that in a third party effort. So that's a fundamental problem with what he's trying to do. If he's successful, I think he can pull candidates away from the Republican Party. It's sort of the Rand Pauls or the Thomas Masseys, the real libertarians, or maybe even the real centrists in purple districts. He might be able to do that. So that could make a real mess. And I do think the money would be better spent pushing forward with the Convention of States. And to be fair, you can do both. I mean, I think one of the things that we forget is we do have a base obligation to elect the best people we possibly can. I'd love to see Musk continue to do that. His money can make a difference. By the way, on the party side, he's also a little bit limited. I think the max amount in the United States you can give to a political party in a cycle is $450,000. That doesn't go very far. The question is, how much other public support could he get? The biggest I've seen in my lifetime was Ross Perot, and that really screwed things up for conservatives for a while. So I'm not sure what he's going to do, but I think Convention of States is a better investment. But also say one last thing, which is it's not short term. In other words, if you want something done right now, there's a certain emotional satisfaction to throwing the bums out of office, right? Get rid of a guy or two guys. Convention of States is we have 15 states to go. And so it's still more of a slog. And I think that's difficult for somebody who's looking for the emotional punch of an election victory.
And it's so important that you say that, especially when we see that, you could put up the best candidate, the person that you feel has the most integrity, and then all of a sudden they get to Washington, D.C., and they don't do anything, or even that, they do exactly the opposite of what they campaigned on. Whereas the Convention of States, if you put term limits in the Constitution through an amendment, then that you can't change that. That's it. I mean, the only way to undo that would be another amendment, and that's very difficult to do, as you know. But we're going to take a quick break, and I want to touch on this when we get back. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Are you ready to move easily and independently without pain and stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Well, discover Native Path Collagen, made with only type 1 and 3 collagen fibers. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut. They provide maximum benefits. And Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, it's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety. Completely flavorless, Native Path Collagen can be added to anything: coffee, smoothies, oatmeal, you name it. It doesn't clump, it absorbs fast thanks to its peptide formula. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a brand you could trust. They offer an 800 number for any questions you may have, and then you'll speak to a real person who's there to help. Visit getnativepath.com/PAS and start your transformation today. That's getnativepath.com/PAS. Back to the PAS Report podcast. I'm with Mark Meckler. So, Mark, we're talking about, third parties, electing candidates, and you brought up we're supposed to be electing the best amongst us. But over recent years, we've seen that even though we think someone may be the best amongst us, once they get in, something changes. And I have to assume it's the DC swamp. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's the DC swamp, but I think there's a piece of it that is sort of under the surface of the water that most people don't look at, which is just the structure of how our government operates. I'll give you one example, Nick, and this is to try to have a little empathy for the men and women that go there and then seem to turn, as we would say. If you look at the way it works in DC, you go there and let's say you come from a rural district and there's something in an ag bill that you promised your folks at home in the district, and you work really hard for that thing. And that's why you got elected, because you want to do that for the folks at home, and you get that done and it's in a bill. And then they load a bunch of other garbage in there, and they load stuff that you don't believe in, that you would never argue for, that you would never vote for. But now, because of the way they can do this and they don't have a rule against this, there's a bunch of garbage in your bill. And if you want to get that thing that you promised your constituents, now you're going to vote for the garbage. And then outsiders who aren't familiar with how the sausage is made, maybe you and me are going to look at that and go like, that congressman's terrible. They voted for this piece of pork. We don't understand how the sausage is made. And I don't mean that to insult you or I just mean it sucks, to be honest with you, the way our system works. It's one of the reasons we need a single subject amendment, one subject per bill. Don't put the congressman in these positions. So there are things inside DC that could take somebody that's a totally moral person, and the structure warps them in a way that from the outside, they look like they've just completely sold out.
Yeah, and I agree with that amendment. No bill should be longer than 20 pages, and it has to be written in normal human language, not the lawyer speak, the legalese that we see. And when we look at it, a lot of people don't understand non-germane amendments, that they don't realize that these are actually weaponized because they'll be attached to bills, vital bills, like military spending, funding our troops. And so if you vote against that bill, well, then you're going to face campaign ads. Hey, he took money away from the troops and he wants our troops to die. But if you vote for it, well, now that amendment's attached and you get attacked that way. So the sausage making, people don't realize how ugly it is. But also people don't understand the process. The people are clueless to the fact they think, well, Republicans are in the majority. And they don't realize that a couple seat majority in the House is virtually nothing. But also they don't realize in the Senate that for most public bills, it's a 60 vote threshold, meaning that they have to get 7 or 8 Democrats on board. And that's assuming all Republicans are supporting the bill in order to get things done. What has happened that most Americans have no idea how our government functions, and can a country survive when its inhabitants are unaware of the roles and responsibilities of the institutions that govern them?
Yeah, I mean, first thing I want to say is everything you just said is true, except for not for your viewers, right? Because they're sophisticated. And I mean that genuinely. I say it jokingly, but I mean it genuinely. They're watching you. You're a poli-sci professor, so you have this experience. And so the kind of person that's going to watch you understands how the sausage is made more than most. Look, I'm not criticizing people for this. Most people, first of all, they're just busy living their lives. I think back to where was I when I was 30, 35 years old, raising a young family. I wasn't paying attention to what was going on in the media and in politics enough. Certainly wasn't involved. And so I didn't really understand all of this stuff. It took me a long time later in life to get interested in that and figure that out. So one, just people are living their lives. Two, a lot of it is obfuscated by the folks in Congress. They do this intentionally. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of grandstanding about things where things are actually getting done behind the scenes that people don't see. So I think part of it are the politicians themselves. And then the last piece is the media. What makes media work, there's an old saying in the news, which is if it bleeds, it leads. And so that means if it's bad, if it's rough, if it's controversial, that's going to lead. How the sausage is made and what's going on behind the scenes, that stuff doesn't make it into the news.
I think you're bringing up a great point, especially with the media, because I hear a lot about that there's so much division in the United States, that we're extremely divided. Now, I'm not denying that. But at the same time, I ask, when were we ever united? I mean, we had the Patriots and the Loyalists. We had the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. I mean, what's his name? Thomas Jefferson and John Adams hated each other, and that was a very contentious race. You go to Jackson and Adams, the Civil War. I mean, I could go on with all the division within our society throughout our history. But at the same time, are we as divided as the media likes to make it out to be? I mean, the reality is that 80% of the American people support term limits on Congress. The reality is that 80% of the American people feel that the federal government spends too much money, that the federal government is too big and bloated. They may criticize when you go to cut. It's, pretty ironic when they do that, the hypocrisy. But 80% believe that men should not be competing in women's sports. So are we really as divided as the media attempts to make it out to be?
No, we're not. I mean, I think on fundamental basics, like you just described, we're not. And where we've really started to split apart as a country are on the social issues, for lack of a better term. All the, you say 80-20, but the problem is there's so much energy on the 20% side on this thing. And that's what's driving our politics. I think there's something really interesting going on in the Democrat Party. As a student of politics, you might appreciate this. I would imagine you and me, I look at almost any political situation. I'm like, I can figure a way out of that, or I can explain that, or I understand the reasons people are doing that. And it's not because I'm so smart. I've just been watching it for a long time. When I watch what the Democrats are doing, there's two things I could say, which is one, I don't really understand who's benefiting, like who's actually benefiting from women or men playing in women's sports. There's no real significant beneficiary class to that. And then same with cutting off the genitals of small children or all that stuff. Who's really benefiting from that? I don't really understand that thoroughly. To me, that's probably a faith issue for me. I just think that's evil stuff. And then the question is, I look at the Democrat Party, and this is the poli-sci question: how did they get out? And the reason I say that, normally a political party, politicians can pivot on a dime. One day they support something, the next day they don't support that thing. And we get frustrated by that, but that is how they get out of political jams. Like the Democrat Party could revamp its entire platform so they're not supporting all the crazy stuff that most Americans don't like, but they won't. And the reason they won't is that's the excited part of their base. It's the trans base, it's the homosexual lobby base, it's the radical environmentalists, it's Antifa. All the excitement for Democrats comes from there. Normal people are turning away from the Democrat Party in droves. So if they were to turn towards what I would call the normal middle, they would lose all the enthusiasm in their party right now. That's a pretty serious conundrum for Democrats.
Well, did you ever think that you'd miss the days of Dick Gephardt and Tom Daschle where they'd be the normal ones? I mean, I never thought I would miss those guys. But even someone like Senator John Fetterman, I mean, in 2022, if you would have told me that he was going to be the voice of reason within the Democrat Party, I'd have been like, the guy can hardly speak. He just had a severe stroke. And yet here we are several years later. And now the Democrats are trying to exile him from the party. They're leaking information that he's so unhealthy. He wasn't unhealthy after he had a severe stroke and couldn't read and had a hard time speaking. But now, essentially, he's extremely unhealthy and he needs to get out of the Senate. Are you surprised by the jackals within the Democrat Party, and jackals exist in the Republican Party. I'm not denying that. But how they're so open and brazen that if you come out against the narrative, the loudest voices, how they try and take you down.
I'm not surprised by it because this is how they operate, generally speaking. But it has become extreme inside the party. It used to be the jackals primarily came for Republicans, and they still do. That's losing some of its force thanks to Trump. But the way that they purge their party is absolutely extraordinary. And I have to say about John Fetterman, you said, I would have never thought that he'd be the guy speaking sense. I look at John Fetterman, things that he says, and I'm like, so what? You have a brain injury, and then when you recover, you become more conservative. That seems to be what's happening with Fetterman.
It certainly does, but who knows how much longer he's going to be in the Democrat Party at the rate he's going, constantly criticizing. But it is refreshing. And listen, I have the utmost respect for those that stand up against their parties. I don't care if it's Democrat or Republican, someone like Rand Paul, I have respect for, because we're not here. We're not some monolithic group that's just supposed to rubber stamp anything. My basic premise is the founding: limited government, self-reliance, personal responsibility. That's what defines America. This concept of liberty, that we have the freedom to make our choices. When it comes to Convention of States, how important is the Convention of States to restoring the fundamental principles that seem lost? You talked about public trust as something of the bygone past.
Yeah, I don't know another way to fix this country. And I want to be clear. I don't think calling a convention of the states is a silver bullet. I think it's one of the important silver bullets in the belt that we have. For example, we mentioned early in the show that the budget is completely out of control. We have now on the books something like $37 trillion. Nobody even knows what a trillion is, let alone 37 trillion. Really, with unfunded liabilities, we're probably pushing 180 to 200 trillion dollars in debt. Again, nobody knows what that is, and they are not going to deal with it. DC will not deal with it unless the economy completely and entirely crashes, in which case we'll have Milei, Argentina type austerity. It'll be really bad. So why do we need a convention of states? Because we will deal with that, because the American public wants a balanced budget amendment. Term limits is another one. You mentioned 80% popularity. Is Congress going to put term limits on themselves? Are they going to propose that? And I know your audience is laughing because no, they're not. The answer is never. Human beings don't do that to themselves, generally speaking, especially at the federal level. So we're going to have to do those things. And I look at things, and this is more broadly, because I think this is where the root of the problem is. There's too much power in DC. They've exceeded the enumerated powers. There were 17 of those in the original Constitution. Now I haven't counted recently, but I'm sure it's over 17,000 of them. I don't know how many powers they have, to be honest with you, Nick. But what I do know is the federal government was never intended to be involved in education or energy or healthcare or the environment or agriculture on a national level. They were just never meant to do those things. Those powers are not in the Constitution. They were made up by the courts. And so if and when we call a convention, which we will, amendments will be proposed taking power away from the federal government. This is the balance that really needs to be restored if we're going to restore trust in our institutions.
Well, are you of the mindset that I am, that the bureaucracy has almost emerged as this fourth branch of government that's unencumbered by the Constitution and almost acts independent from the legislative body, even though the legislature is supposed to have oversight, and independent of the chief executive officer of the United States as well? Are you of that same mindset?
Yeah, I mean, you just described a fundamental problem in America that started in the early 1900s as we expanded federal power. Wilson started it. FDR put the crowning steps on top of it, the key star, the top stones on top of it.
What and LBJ put her on steroids.
There you go. So he had all the rails. Everything was already built. So you look at this stuff. What we've done is we've empowered this branch of government that should never have had any power, in my opinion. All laws are supposed to come from Congress. They don't anymore. That's a violation of the Constitution. But the courts allowed this to start in the early 1900s, 1913, a case for Wickard v. Filburn, really expanded federal government power to an almost unlimited extent. There's a line of cases that come off that continue to expand it. Now, the good news is we've seen the court start to rein this in a bit, the power of the administrative state. We had the Chevron case last year, which removed a bunch of deference that was provided to these agencies. And I think we're seeing these agencies slowly be shrunk. But the only way you get rid of these agencies permanently and assure that they don't grow again during a Democrat administration is you call a convention of states. We say things like, nope, federal government can't be involved in education or energy or healthcare. All that stuff was meant for the states. Any money the federal government has collected for those things just gets block granted straight back to the states. We let the states handle them. Nick, you know this, again, poli-sci professor. Every state has one of those departments that I just mentioned on their own. They have their own ag and their own environmental quality and their own education. We don't need the federal government involved in that stuff.
It's a great point. I mean, when you look at it, the states unfortunately have become so addicted to the federal apparatus that they've allowed the federal government to have so much power, and it's throwing the system of federalism off balance. It's why everyone needs to check out Convention of States, call your representatives, get them on board in the state assemblies and the state senates, because a Convention of States really is a unique process. And I need to see one before I die. I mean, I'm just putting that out there. I do want to see a Convention of States take place before I leave this earth. Mark, thanks for joining me. Always enjoy our conversations.
Hey, God bless, Nick. Great being with you.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.